We had like a bunch of competitors, and at every single all hands, we would talk about the competitors. But when, one of the things that Jeff Yale would always say is like, it doesn't really matter like what they're doing, but like the thing that we are focused on is the customer problem. The way that we differentiate ourselves is we wear the customer's shoes. We make sure that our documentation is top notch. Like we make sure that the product is super duper easy to use. So much so that every new hire at Twilio, you had to make an application using the API. Even the non-technical folks had to also do this, and you got to earn your track jacket and just be like, okay, like I built something using an API, even somebody who had never written a line of code. But that was a way to sort of enforce the fact that this is an API that is supposed to be easy to use and easy to adopt, and also be incredibly powerful.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for being with us today,
thanks for having me.
At the drafting table. I, of course, know you from your role as CTO at FireHydrant, which is a workbench portfolio company.
Yes.
But you were previously always at GitHub, at Twilio. And I've actually had you come and speak to a bunch of our workbench portfolio companies in the past already. I was like, Danielle has lots of hot takes.
Oh, yes, I do.
That is what this pod is all about, is we want some hot takes. And specifically on engineering and product, right? And obviously all your experiences there. So I'm really pumped to have you with us.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah. Okay, cool. So let's dive in. And the question we already started chatting through, but I asked all my guests, which is, what is the one thing you think a founder should know how to do before they start a company, knowing that there's like endless things that they will learn on the job, but especially as it relates to like building and shipping product.
Yeah. I mean, I think there's so many things that you have to remember and learn as you were starting a company. But I think like the most important thing you have to remember is that you are building to solve customer problems. And if it is not a true problem that the customer has, then you're going to be wasting a lot of time, a lot of effort, a lot of resources, just building something that, frankly, nobody is looking for. And really making sure that you are honing in on what is the problems, the customer's problems that you're trying to solve, and making sure that you are ruthlessly going back and saying, like, talking to customers, validating things, and making sure that you're building something that they actively want and are willing to pay money for. Like, that's kind of the biggest thing. Like, I think founders are wonderful in that they have like these amazing ideas, but when I ask them like, okay, well, what is your monetization strategy? And they're like, I don't know. And so it's like at the end of the day, it is also a business, and you have to remember like, businesses stay in business because they make money and because they are solving the right problems for customers, and that's really key.
Okay, tell me about the right problems. I mean, I think that is so spot on, because at the end of the day, if you talk to 100 customers, they'll likely tell you very similar problems, but there are also going to be, depending on if you're talking to an enterprise customer, an SMB customer, whoever, there's going to be many different problems to solve. And I think that's perhaps where, in the earliest of days, as you know, where we invest at seed, at a workbench, it's 0 to 1. It's finding even sometimes which customer we should be solving a problem for.
Yeah. I think the only way that you really can get there is, you start with an idea, but then you have to validate that idea. And the only way that you really can do that is by talking with customers, talking with people, putting up a prototype in front of them, have them actually touch the prototype. You can take a look at a Figma document, but it's not the same as like really getting your hands dirty and like trying out a product. And that's when you're really gonna get that kind of feedback. And then you can ask them like, how much would you pay for this? Would you be willing to be a design partner for us? So my husband is a product manager at an earlier stage company called Akita. And so he actually helped them through a pivot where they had thought that the customers had wanted one thing, but they noticed that, they weren't getting, a lot of paid customers, or they had a design partner that was great with them, but, never really committed to going to that next level of like, all right, you really should be charging something. Like, I want to pay because this product is so amazing. And so he like took a look at all of the customer data, and he was like, why is this just not converting?
Yeah.
And then really sort of taking a look at that and be like, okay, like let's do a series of experiments. This is when Twitter was, still, Twitter, and using that, the CEO's network and looking at all of the data that she had and be like, okay, I'm going to ask this question, would you rather, this or this? Or, what are you looking for as you are buying security-based products? Like, what are the check marks in here? Yeah. And they realized that the barrier to entry for the buyers for this particular product that they had originally started making was so high, they would need all of these enterprise grade features in order to even be a contender in the market. So you have to, ask the right questions and then ask them again and then tweak the question, ask it a different way, try to see like, okay, this is interesting, but would you buy it? What do you need in order to buy it? What would you need in order to convince, your executives? Like, what are your executives trying to do? What's your company trying to do? What's the biggest things that people are worried about within your company and you might need help with? Cost consolidation is really, really important right now. So if you don't have that sort of strategy, you're going to really see a lot of struggles later on. So they were able to successfully pivot, and now Akita is actually part of Postman. And so, they had a happy exit there. But really sort of taking a look at like, what's the data, asking those questions, and then keep refining those questions until you hit, that vein of information. You're like, okay, we're seeing a lot of responses in this way. Let's keep going.
Yeah. And hearing similar responses, right? I think it's so helpful to hear like the types of questions you should be asking, right? I know there's a school of thought which is like, just ask. If you have enough conversations, you will generally get some sort of feedback. But I do think, especially for some founders in the earliest of days, when they're talking to prospects, right, they really want these users. And so they might ask questions in a certain way. So I guess, do you have any other best practices you share on this kind of customer discovery or user discovery?
Yeah, watch people use a product. It's always easy to be like, oh, give me any feedback, or my door is always open. I think you really have to watch somebody go through the pain of like either using your product or using a prototype or even using something that they're currently using that they're deeply unhappy about, and be like, what are you trying to achieve here? What is the thing that you're trying to do here? What would make it better? What is your boss asking you to do? Like, how long does it take for you to do something? How many systems do you actually have to use in order to achieve this goal? But like, again, the end state is you're trying to achieve something. That customer already knows, like, they have an end goal in sight. They have to achieve something. So you're trying to find a better way to do it. You're trying to do it faster. You're trying to do it cheaper. You're trying to do it in a way that they wouldn't expect it necessarily. And so making sure that you're getting to that end state in a way that, works really well with the person there. And you're providing that value of being able to achieve their goal faster, easier, cheaper, better analytics to your managers. Like, that is really where you're going to start showcasing your product's value. And that's really where you're going to be able to shine as a product.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's spot on in terms of just seeing how they use these products, right? And you mentioned existing ones too, right? I think the reality is like very few, at least B2B companies, exist in a vacuum. There's almost always some sort of competitor, whether it's a legacy one, whether it's a modern one. What are you, and I guess like the follow on to that is that, I've seen companies get on just like this treadmill, this like never ending treadmill of like having to keep up in terms of features, right? Because at the end of the day, customers will be like, well, I definitely need these 10 features. The reality is like you probably don't need all 10, but like they do sometimes have some requirements, right? And so what are kind of your thoughts and pro tips or hot takes on having to reach feature parity? That is like the requirement in order for like a sale to go through versus trying to build net new things that will actually differentiate you from everyone else.
I think it's really key to know what is the DNA of your culture, or the DNA of your product. there's a lot of competitors in the space. Competitors are a good thing. It helps innovation. It makes you better. But if you're trying to constantly copy another competitor, at that point, it's like, well, what makes you special? What is the thing that makes you who you are? What is the reason why people want to buy you? And if you don't have a clear sense of what that is, then I would say that your product may not have an identity. And so, as you're looking through the competitor space, like, why should somebody buy you? And you're like really asking the hard question of like, what sets us apart? What is the reason for this? Twilio was one of the first of its kind, but it wasn't the only telephony company.
It's such a good reminder because sometimes we forget that, right?
Right.
We're like, oh, Twilio must have been the only one, but
it wasn't.
You did have competitors.
No, we had like a bunch of competitors, and at every single all hands, we would talk about the competitors. But when one of the things that Jeff Yale would always say is like, it doesn't. I mean, it does, but it doesn't really matter like what they're doing. But like the thing that we are focused on is the customer problem. The way that we differentiate ourselves is we wear the customer's shoes. We make sure that our documentation is top notch. Like we make sure that the product is super duper easy to use. So much so that every new hire at Twilio, you had to make an application using the API.
Really?
Yeah. So even the non-technical folks had to also do this, and you got to earn your track jacket and just be like, okay, like I built something using an API, even somebody who had never written a line of code. But that was a way to sort of enforce the fact that this is an API that is supposed to be easy to use and easy to adopt and also be incredibly powerful. And so if you're really sort of laser focused on what is the differentiators, then that's the reason why people are going to go to you. Now, there are going to be, certain table stakes that might be needed in order to win a sales deal. Maybe you need like certain compliance things. Maybe there are features that are expected because that's just industry standard. And so, there are things that you do have to build, like there's security features, there's RBAC, there's, certain alerting features that we have to build at FireHydrant. Those, understandably, you have to keep up with them. But at the same time, it's like, what is the thing that, people want to buy? They're like, what is the thing that the one thing that people remember when they think about your product? And if you can't say that, and if your customers can't say it, then it becomes a question of like, all right, what's your sales strategy? Is it now a race to the bottom in order to get the deals in order to close it? Hopefully not. Hopefully the product speaks for itself and is like, this is the one thing that we're known for. Like FireHydrant, like we are known for like runbooks and powerful automation and Signals. Signals is a PagerDuty competitor, but it's owned by teams. The teams who build the product, own the on-call schedule. They own the services, and everything sort of relates back up into that. Now, that's what people know FireHydrant for. And so the more that we can sort of lean into that, the easier it becomes for us to go out and say like, oh, like we work at FireHydrant. People are like, oh yeah, no, your runbooks are like really great. Like, oh, I used Signals the other day. Like it was so much better, to alert people. And it's like, yeah, that's fantastic. That's what we want to be known for.
Yeah. And then of course, you still have to build behind the scenes, all the other things to support that, right? But like you want to make sure that there is that one thing, especially in a sea of competitors, right? Yeah. I am curious your thoughts on like UX as like the differentiator, right? Yeah. Because there's obviously like a whole generation of software, especially enterprise software, that just like does not look or work very well. Yeah. Right. And this is like something we talk about even at Workbench is like, is UX itself enough for it to be defensible? This is like, I'm just like so curious your thoughts. We've never talked about this.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I think that UX gets you pretty far in the door. But I think that there is a difference between, your initial first couple of steps and then the longevity of the product, your NRR. Like, is UX going to be enough to get that renewal in the future? Maybe. I think that there is a lot to be said, a lot of really good things to be said about lowering the cognitive overload of a site or your page. Particularly in incident management, you want to be able to be usable at 2 a.m.
Yeah.
An engineer gets paged and it's 2 a.m. and I've definitely gotten paged, still get paged. It needs to be just easy to use. That being said, it still goes back to what is the problem that you're trying to solve. If it is a beautiful UX, but maybe limited, in terms of what it can do, can it scale with a company? Can it scale with the teams? Does it have the amount of configuration that is necessary as people are starting to consolidate tools so that maybe you have a team that's coming in that is a security team that's coming in and, maybe you're onboarding them onto the product. Is it configurable enough and powerful enough to actually add in somebody that maybe wasn't the original target audience? And so it really depends on the situation. I do think that UX is very important, lowering that cognitive overload in terms of being able to use a product. Very, very important. People don't want to use something that's hard to use. That's understandable. Is it enough to, keep a contract going forever? I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know. It really just depends.
Yeah, totally. And one of the things I had already picked your brain on is, and this is like fast forward. Let's assume you're a company, you've got customers. In general, with enterprise software, there's some sort of implementation. Like it just is going to be a fact of life, right? And so that is when I start to see some tensions happen where maybe your first set of engineers were very focused on shipping product to customers. But then there comes a time when like internal tooling for your own team really matters, right? Maybe you have a CS team or an implementation team that also needs tools to help them onboard customers, right? I'm curious, like any pro tips there, right? And how you start to then divide your engineering team to say, okay, you guys work on customer features, you guys work on internal tooling, and how to balance that.
Yeah. It's actually interesting. We're currently going through an exercise like this right now. So I just had all of these beautiful charts that I can't show here around specifically that. And it kind of just depends on what is the return on investment for, the things that are causing us pain. And so, anytime there is technical debt or product debt or even like operations debt, there are workarounds for sure. But how many hours are we spending on these workarounds that, could be better used towards, actually building features or getting customers onboarded or, answering, support tickets faster. And so, you have a lot of data that you can start pulling together and say like, okay, like how many hours does this one person spend manually, offboarding a customer? Yeah. How many clicks does that actually take? Yeah. How many things do we have to remember in order to do that? Where are some of the foot guns that may come up where if we forget to do a specific step, maybe we're out of compliance for that? And how frustrated are the engineers if they're constantly fighting their tools? Then that means that they're not actively building products. And so if you're able to quantify some of these pains, it makes it a lot easier to say like, oh, Courtney, my VP of finance, actually suggested that we spend money on contractors to help us build things because there were certain things that were just like, it's just not worth it for our full-time engineers to be doing, these Ruby upgrades. We were pretty far behind, and it's a fairly straightforward process. But that it's going to be approximately 6 weeks to do for one person full time, what could we actually be building in that time that could be delivering customer value versus if we got a part-time person as a contractor to do that for us, what would be the benefit for that if we could also gain some performance gains from there and some security gains by having all of our packages up to date. And so being able to have those sort of conversations where, time isn't free. Developer time is not free.
Definitely not.
It's not. And support time is not free. And so how do you quantify all of these different things and then say, what could folks be spending their time doing more that would provide value here?
Yeah. I mean, I think it's such a great point around the data behind it, right? And it's, again, not just developer time, but to your point, support time, right? And the data point part, I think, is interesting, especially when you're much later stage. You can actually really start to quantify. But I'd be curious any hot takes you might have on like forecasting engineering time accurately, because I feel like that's the other part of it is like, okay, we need to build this feature. It's going to take us 6 weeks. But then actually once you get going, you're like, oh, wait, this is taking us way longer than 6 weeks, right? In general, I think it usually takes longer. It doesn't
Always
usually
takes longer.
It doesn't usually go faster. So what hot takes do you have on that?
Oh my gosh. I think that that is probably one of the hardest things to do in engineering is proper estimation. Because, you basically only have the information that you have at the beginning. Your estimation comes from a point in time. And so I don't think it's possible to ever have 100% estimation accuracy. And I don't necessarily think that you need to, but I think that you need to break up your project in such a way where you have certain milestones and then you do milestone check-ins and then you can say like, okay, we know that we needed to do X, Y, and Z for a product. Let's do a check-in at X. X we think is going to take about 3 weeks. Okay. Within those 3 weeks, we finished it. Great milestone check-in. Okay, what did we learn? What are we thinking about what's coming up next? And then how can we then start just thinking about that next chunk of work? Because engineers can really only estimate accurately probably about 2 weeks out.
That's a really good framework.
Yeah. There's a really great series of blog posts that I had been looking at, and it was something around I forget who the author was, but it was about the steel thread. Okay. And so it's about thinking about building out the thinnest sliver of end-to-end functionality. So say you want to be able to create a form on a website. And so you want to be able to put up the simplest form, like maybe it's one field on a form with a button, and it returns a success notification. It doesn't have to go to the back end. It doesn't have to talk to anything. It just needs to feel right. So you can put it in front of a customer and say, is this what you think that it should look like? And then the customer can say yes or no. You get that early feedback. And so really getting that early feedback as you are starting to build along, and really only estimating within each milestone, and then you can think about maybe what comes after that. But the true engineering estimation, you can really only do that within a set period of time. If you try and estimate a full project, recipe for disaster. Recipe for disaster. You can have general ideas around it, and you should. But the accuracy of that is not really going to be like, you should just give up on that idea that you're going to be accurate around anything past a couple of weeks.
Past 2 weeks. 2
That's
weeks.
it. That's
good,
it. Yeah.
Good, like, rule of thumb.
Right.
Yeah. Okay.
Right.
What do you think are some blockers that do come up, again, once you're getting a team, really building, and that you think a lot of early stage founders just like might not be aware of, that like common things that come up, right, from across all the different organizations you've worked with? Like, what are reasons for either delays or challenges that come up that are just unknowns?
Oh my goodness. You need to have slack in your estimation budget. So assuming that you have an idea of story points, earlier stage, less important earlier on. But as you start growing as an organization, you need to have a little bit more rigor around like estimations and sprint planning and all of that fun stuff. But you also need to make sure that you have room for the unexpected. And so the unexpected is going to be a hot customer that comes in, which is a logo that we just need to have. Like we as a company need to have this customer. We all have those. And we're like, that's just going to be the cherry on top on our website. We're going to point to that person. Like they're going to be a customer reference for us. Like we were going to get a case study. Like we need to take out our competitors. We need this customer, but they need a feature. They might need a couple of features. Like of course they're gonna make us work for it. And so like you gotta put time and slack in your estimation budget for those kinds of things. It's just gonna happen.
Yeah.
You gotta have some extra time for incidents. Like that's gonna happen. Not only managing the incident, but also managing the work that comes out of it to make sure it doesn't actually happen again. You got to leave time for bug fixes. If you ignore the bug fixes, they're going to keep piling up, and then pretty soon no one's going to want to use your product because it doesn't work well. Yeah. And so you got to like make sure that you are, your roadmap and your backlog is fluid. And so I've been working with percentages right now.
Okay.
And so we've been taking the number of support tickets divided by our ARR, and then we have sort of like a product health score. So we have an idea of like, okay, when do we need to reduce the amount of feature work that we're doing and focus more on stability of the product? And right now we've swung a little bit more on the stability of the product right now. So there's some technical debt that we need to fix. We've got good scaling problems right now where, we've got some areas of the stack where it's, if we've got high traffic times, like it might struggle a little bit.
Yeah.
Good scaling problems to have.
Totally. Champagne
problems to have. Still problems to have. Still problems that need to get fixed. But, they're solvable problems. You just got to put some time and effort into it. Yeah. That does mean that the ratio is lower for net new features. But now we've got a system that we can track over time. We're like, okay, if we spent more time on features here, we saw an uptick in support tickets coming out over here. Then that means we need to lower the amount of new feature work that we're doing and focus more on stability. And then being able to like keep a very, very close eye on that over time, because, people want a product that works. People want a product that solves their problem. Yeah. New features are wonderful and they're shiny, but if they don't work, then they don't work. And so you gotta keep a real close eye on that.
I love that formula you shared, right? And again, how to put data around so much of what you're doing as an engineering leader and not just, vibing. Yeah. Right? And it's such a good reminder. Like, it is very tempting. New feature. That'll solve all our problems.
Right. Yeah.
But I'm curious your take. I was speaking with other engineering product leaders. They've said, like, the reality is, like, there's probably within, like, 20 features you have, there's probably like a subset of that, like that most of your customers are using very religiously. Right. And so making sure, exactly to your point earlier, like what is that like secret sauce that's us, that is our identity. So again, I just think it's such a good reminder, making sure that like the parts of your product that people do love and think are really, really special do also work really well.
Yes. Making sure you have product metrics around that is so important, and being clear on like what are the most important parts of the product. Do they work really, really well? And how can we constantly improve them? Because I was thinking about this of like, what are the 3 metrics that we need to know if they're going well, that I know the support queue is okay. Yeah. And for us, it's like time to declare an incident, time to attach a runbook, and time to send a signal alert. If any of those metrics are off, I just know, I can feel it coming. I know support tickets are coming.
Yeah.
And justifiably so.
Yeah.
Like, you know, those are the most important parts of the product.
Yeah.
They have to be bulletproof. And if they're not, they're going to, like, our customers will rightfully tell us so. And so, you know, keeping a very, very close eye on it, like, we should be making sure that we're ahead of that before people are writing in.
Yeah, I love that. And how are you instrumenting that? Is that like, again, something that you guys have built into the product that's relatively easy for your team to be tracking?
I think it's a constantly evolving problem for us. There's a couple of different ways that we're doing it. There are some ways that we're like are better than others. We're using Datadog, we're using Honeycomb, we're using Bugsnag to catch exceptions. And I think that we're still refining it. We're trying out like Datadog APMs right now. And so I'm not quite happy with that quite yet, but it's something that we're actively working on right now.
And you're trying to put something in place just to really help inform that data.
Right. Yeah. Because, you know, those are the most important parts of our product. Like, they have to work.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. We've talked a little bit about like maintaining or like the cost of maintaining customers, right? Because again, customers also aren't like free, right? And especially as it comes to infrastructure and things like that. So yeah, curious any takes you have on that is useful for people to, especially as engineering leaders, to just like be aware of. I mean, one very specific example is, you know, even just like the pure like infrastructure cost, right? Depending if your product is running on records or database or like polls, it's like you really have to kind of watch that because sometimes it can get out of hand and you might not even realize it, right? So I think it comes back to your point about just instrumenting.
Yeah. So that's actually been a company goal of ours, or one of the company goals is to make sure that we have a reasonable spend for the size of business that we're at. And it's something that we openly talk about in every single all hands. There are emojis around this. Like,
what is the emoji? Is it a dollar sign?
They're about hot dogs. FireHydrant is very much about hot dogs. I do not know why. I have asked that question. No one has ever given me an answer.
Hey, some things are just meant to be.
It just is. And so we have the emojis around the specific numbers that we're trying to hit as a burn rate. So we have a company goal around logos, we have a company goal around NRR, and then we have one around burn rate. And everybody knows what they are. We can all repeat them. We all have the emojis. But that also means that, you know, even on the engineering team, people have taken it very seriously. They're like, you know, we are not utilizing these tools effectively. Like, we did some Circle CI tuning like earlier this week where people were like, we don't need to be running all of these things in parallel. Like, if I just tune this down, there's an extra 3 minutes of lag to run to run our tests. Let's just run an experiment for a week and see if anybody notices. Saves us $3,000 a month.
That's so cool. And one of your engineers found that?
Yeah.
That's so cool.
Just that they're like, everybody's just kind of like tweaking things here and there. And people are like, oh, hey, like, I noticed that this cluster was running. And, you know, are we really using this anymore? Like, it was for a project that we had spun up. Like, no one has really used it. Can I just turn it off? And I was like, yeah, absolutely.
That's so cool.
Yeah.
It's so cool to have the team aligned on that, right? And everyone really bought into like figuring that out.
Yeah. Because we also talked about how burn rate is also part of the company's strategy. You know, you get new logos in, that adds new fuel to the fire. If we work on NRR and we work on that upsell motion and that renewal motion, that means longevity for the company, as well as providing value for customers time and time again. And then you work on that burn rate, bringing down those costs. Those three things kind of like work together to help us have a healthy company and you know, helping us all be here for a long time. And everyone's really sort of embraced that of like, okay, this ticket is going to help us get this new logo. Great. That goes with our new logo goals. Or this one is for one of our favorite customers here. You know, we know that they're going to have a renewal coming up. Great. I'm happy to do that. or we're so close to hitting our burn rate. We are so close to hitting our company burn rate numbers, and everyone's like, oh, we're going to be turning off these instances over here. I think we're actually going to hit it this month. And so everyone's like really invested in these numbers.
I love that.
Yeah. And actually a lot of these came from like Dave Politis, who we've been working with very closely from Workbench.
Yes.
And so it's been great to see everybody sort of get around these together.
I love that. And this actually ties back probably to something we talked about a little bit earlier, which is all around implementation, right? And the reality is like there's a cost implementation as well, right? Yeah. It really affects your like margins as a software business.
Yeah.
And so, in the early days, I always say to our founders, like, don't worry too much about margins. That's like a later stage problem, right? Because in the early days, you just want to like land customers and then you want to build something, you want to and then get them up and running and make them super successful. But at some point, margins do come into play.
They do, yeah.
Right? And so one of the things I was talking about with some of our other companies is, again, finding that right balance of like, of course, we can just use brute force and manual time from our CS team to onboard a customer.
Yeah.
Or we could build internal tooling that allows them to do that. And one of the big unlocks they had was once they started some of like the easier configuration tooling that allowed them to just like get customers up and running, they were actually able to really see a difference between like what was a configuration request versus what is like an actual product request.
Yeah.
And customers actually were like so happy because they felt like they realized so much of what they were asking was around configuration, not actually product. And so once that all got kind of taken care of, then they could really focus like on the product asks.
Yeah.
And I just thought that was like such a huge like light bulb moment,
I like to think of it as like in the early days, you're still trying to figure out what the pattern is. And you don't want to do too many like early abstractions. One of my engineers said like, if you have one data point, it's a single data point. If you have two data points, you have a line, but you don't necessarily have a trend. It could be a linear line. It could be an exponential line. It could be a logarithmic line. You don't know what type of line it is.
I love that.
A third point, now you're starting to have a trend, and now you can start plotting out like, okay, we think that it's headed in this different direction. And then like the more data points you have, the more you can realize like which direction you're actually going in. And I think about that in terms of like tooling. I think about that in terms of like products or even like abstractions within the code base. You don't want to over optimize too early. You want to have a couple of different data points to see like, is this a trend? And then once you have a trend, it might be diminishing returns to continue getting those data points, or continuing to do a lot of these things by hand, because now you clearly have a trend. You know what's happening. Why are we still doing it this way? There are more efficient ways to do it now that we know what we're doing.
Totally.
And so being clear around that point of like, okay, we know what we're going, like, let's just make this easier for ourselves.
Totally. And then having all that data, like you said earlier, just such a good reminder.
Yeah.
Hey, it's actually taking our CS team like 10 hours per customer account, right? And then you back that into the engineering time, which you're giving yourself 2 weeks.
Right.
2 weeks of, of planning. But that's, I think, such a good reminder that data, the more data you have, right?
Yeah.
One of the things that came up actually earlier today is one of our companies was saying they're actually shipping products so fast that a lot of the other people on the team are not aware of it, outside the engineering team, right? Any pro tips you have around that, making sure people know like all the good stuff your team is building?
Oh my gosh. So Friday demo days are like sacred for us.
You guys have done an amazing job with those. I want to hear more about it.
Yeah. So it's every single Friday. The engineering team always has something that they're working on. And we talk about it at the beginning of the week. We're like, all right, what are we planning for demos? We do a midweek check-in. Like, how are we checking in on demos? And then at the end of the week, we show them off to the customers. Sometimes they're internal customers, which is people. Yeah. But it also helps a lot of maybe the customer facing folks to know what is new within the product. And then we ship a change log that's going to come out the next week. So that is something that is scripted. It pulls from GitHub. You add a label to your PR. There'll be a script that pulls that in, and it'll help generate the change log. But those are really sort of a good sort of cultural touch point to be like, okay, these are the things that we're currently working on. These are the things that are new within the product. And so you can see it change week over week. And people get really, really excited for those.
That's so cool.
Yeah.
I think that's the key part is like having the team be proud of what they're building.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And making sure everyone else sees that.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I've waited a long time, but like I feel like I can't avoid it. It was like we have to talk about AI.
Of course,
right? We have to talk about AI.
Yeah.
And the reality is like it's changing a lot on like engineering and development and software development.
Mm-hmm.
So like curious again, the hot takes you have.
Yes.
So I think some really good stuff, but I'm sure some other stuff that's like not necessarily like the end all be all.
I think that we don't need more AI to generate code.
Okay.
I think we have enough code. No more code.
Well, like good code, right?
Yeah. But the thing is like a lot of like Copilot and like a lot of these other like coding tools, they generate a lot of things that are great for prototypes.
Yeah.
Because they're very much in isolation of the prompt of what they're giving. I think there's a lot of value in debugging tools.
Okay.
Especially with a lot of the macroeconomic changes, there's a lot of layoffs that happen. That means that the institutional knowledge might be low within a company. You might have teams that are taking over areas that they didn't know about before, and it takes time to understand what a part of a code base is doing if you're not familiar with it. And so if you have tools that help developers understand what is going on and be able to onboard people faster and be able to understand how things are working, then you'll be able to help people move things a lot faster. And I think that, code generation can be part of it. But I don't think that should be the only thing that we're doing.
Yeah.
And for code generation or for coding tools, I think a lot more emphasis. I would love to see a lot more emphasis on like debugging. Like Cursor's really good at this. And so just really making sure like what is the actual problem that we're trying to solve here? Engineers can write a lot of code. What happens after that? Yeah. Like what happens with all of that code? Okay, now it's in your code base. Okay, great. Now you have thousands and thousands of lines of code that, an AI wrote. Who's going to understand that?
Totally.
AI's not going to be on call. I'm not going to call
at
Copilot.
2 a.m.
Yeah. Hey, Copilot.
Getting an alert.
What did you write over here? Copilot's not going to answer the pager. Like, who's going to answer the pager? The person on your team is going to answer it. Yeah. And if they don't understand it, that incident's going to go on for much longer.
Absolutely.
And so how can you help engineers understand what is going on? That's really going to be providing a lot of value.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's, again, of all the conversation, like you're totally right. It's not talked about enough. Yeah. That's the debugging part specifically.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. Do you think that in the future we're not even going to really need the mock-ups and we can just go straight to prototype and showing customers, hey, like, look at this, like, relatively okay prototype already?
Yeah, I think so. And I think that some of that already is happening, maybe not within tech yet. But you kind of see that more on like the creative side, where you can give a prompt and, you can get a video out of it. You can get a TikTok out of it. And I think that works as a very good starting point. But, there's like, I'm a photographer on the side.
Yes.
And so there's a difference between a photo and art. And, sometimes, a photo that is generated might be good for the use case, but people recognize what good is. And there's no real way to explain it, but you know it when you see it. You know it when you touch it. And I think the same thing is with software of like, people can tell when a product is just like gross. You're like, oh, this is
not it.
This is not it. This is not it. This is not it. You get this is a discount product. Like, we don't want that. I don't want that. I don't want a Temu product. Like, no, that's not good.
Oh my gosh, I'm dying. That's so true.
You don't want that. You don't want your product to be known as that. You want a high quality product that people are going to pay for. Because that payment pays for all of our bills, but like also the pride in your own product.
Yes.
And so, I think it's good for, some making the ideation faster, but that shouldn't be the end. Take inspiration from it. But again, what is your secret sauce? What is the thing that is so important to your product that you need to have on there? That's where the art comes in.
Totally.
And that is really the place where humans have to be in.
Yeah.
You can always tell when something is like sloppily made or like AI generated, and people were just like, it's fine. It's not fine.
Yeah.
Like, have higher standards for yourself. Start somewhere,
Yeah.
and then bring it to that next level. That's where the real value comes in.
And get paid for it.
Get paid for it.
That is where we started.
Yes,
that is where we're ending.
Exactly.
I love that. I love that
Yes.
so much. Okay, awesome. I guess I only have a few last questions, which is like, what is the one thing you find yourself saying to founders often? Maybe not like necessarily Robert, but I know you advise a bunch of other companies.
Yeah.
I know you've talked to a bunch of our founders.
Yeah.
Right? And the reality is like a lot of our founders actually are technical. So they've actually shipped code before. But do you feel like when they start a company and they're in like a founder mindset versus an engineering mindset, something changes?
Yeah.
Like, or what is like that one piece of advice you find yourself like repeating them to them often?
Oh man, it is usually, what is your monetization strategy? A lot of founders, especially technical founders, they've got a great idea. This is going to change the world. Like, this is amazing. Like, no one's ever done this before. And I'm like, okay, I love your energy. How are you going to make money? And then just crestfallen. Like, no.
Well, like, it's open source.
It's open source. Like, it's going to be fine. And I was like, no, I helped build the feature that helped open source maintainers get paid. It is a lot of work.
Totally.
And so, it's at the end of the day, it is a great idea that needs to be translated into a business. And so how are you going to get there? And that is the product thinking. That is like solving the customer problem. That is like ruthlessly looking through feedback and finding those trends and finding that vein of information that you're like, this is the reason why people will pay for this. This is the secret sauce.
Totally. And the fact that pricing continues to change, I would say, right? Like, I think there's the pricing you start with at seed, which is almost always very low.
So low.
And then there is a constant conversation of like, okay, well, how do we keep pushing up? But then also what happens when we add in new products?
Yeah.
Like, I think that's the part where it gets like really complex and fun, right?
Oh, yes.
But that's the part it's like you just don't know, right? And when you have additional SKUs, how do you charge for them, right? And I'm sure, obviously, it's funny because I sometimes say that the CTOs at our companies are the best sales leaders. Because they're the ones who have spent so much time building this shit.
Yeah.
And they're like, we need you to go out and sell this.
Yes.
Right? And sell what's on the truck. Right?
We built these things for you. Sell it.
Go sell it. And so they're almost like the best CRO or the best board member because they're the ones watching the sales team being like, let's go.
Come on. We got goals here. Let's go.
Yeah. And we built this for you to sell. So, time to hit your numbers. Right?
It's true. It's true.
Okay. So if you were to fast forward through this episode, what do you think is the one takeaway that founders should know?
Oh, you gotta build something that customers want. You gotta know what is it that what is the problem that you're solving for the customers, and how are you gonna build it so that they will pay you for it.
Well, thank you so much, Danielle, for being with us at the
thanks for
drafting
having
table.
me. Yeah.